Hi, my name is River, and today we're discussing the intersection of gender with our other social identities, a background on the origin of the term intersectionality. Social theorist Amy Julia Cooper is quite possibly the first person to ever write material that intentionally highlighted the intersectionality concept. Cooper was born to enslaved parents, and by the time she reached the age 5 years old, slavery had been abolished, and she decided to seek higher forms of education as a result. Anna J. Cooper soared leaps and bounds through her educational journey, being the fourth Black woman in America to earn a PhD. She also authored a book surrounding the conditions of her birth titled A Voice from the South by a Black woman. In the book, Cooper stated that the unique experiences of women or Black people could not fully be comprehended without a careful examination of the experiences of Black women. Her book was the first of its kind, so much that many women consider her to be a pioneer of Black feminism. What is intersectionality? Lawyer Kimberly Crenshaw officially brought meaning to the term intersectionality in a lawsuit with the General Motors Company. The lawsuit involving five Black women claimed that the company was discriminating based on both race and gender. General Motors alleged this couldn't be true because they employ both women and Black men. With that, it was concluded that they could not be discriminating against Black women just based upon their race and gender. Why is this important? Because no law prevented this from happening back then, and this is still a continuing problem today. These different social identities risk facing different kinds of negative attitudes, which lead to systematic disadvantages that can have an influence on people for their entire lives. Without thinking about the intersectionality, we cannot fully consider all of the levels of discrimination and disadvantage a person is facing. As long as the law remains oblivious to the concept of intersectionality, will the justice for all will remain hard to obtain. Understanding how these identities lead to multiple types of discrimination and disadvantage can lead to the deconstruction of the systems in place, keeping people in oppression and perpetual disadvantage, hopefully building a more intersectionally aware culture within its wake. What is gender intersectionality? Intersectionality is a concept in which the framework is based on analyzing how gender reacts and interacts with other parts of social identities to generate different discrimination and disadvantage. The concept of intersectionality originating from Black feminist thought, um, there was little illustration of that, though, within society at the time. During the women's movement of the 60s and 70s, white women still hadn't acknowledged the unique oppressions experienced by Black women, a group that has faced multifaceted discrimination their whole entire lives. And white women failed to recognize that each individual's experience of gender is influenced by their racial identities and thus generalize their experiences of oppression to women of all racial backgrounds, even though their experiences as white women were completely different from Black women. Why is gender important to intersectionality? When we can acknowledge the different types of oppression being experienced by people of all genders who have an array of social groups they belong to, we can better conceptualize the difficulties they face day to day. This can lead us to a better understanding of cultural, economic barriers in place that influence the gender strategies of different individuals. The disadvantages faced by a Black woman are completely different from those faced by a white woman, and those disadvantages that are faced by a Black disabled woman are completely different by those faced by their able-bodied counterparts. And when we can understand how these identities interact with one another, we can understand the individual experiences of discrimination endured by all of these uniquely individual social groups. Gender and race intersectionality. Being a Black man in America and stereotyping a Black man. The stereotyping of Black people within America dates back to slavery, when Black men were thought of as too ignorant and simple-minded to have their own freedoms, which is why they needed a master to take care of them. After the abolition of slavery, the tides had changed, and instead of being weak and ineffectual, Black men were being stereotyped by white supremacists as being aggressive, having higher probability of criminality, and sexually dangerous. This stereotype is still prevalent today, as most white people generalize Black people as being more aggressive, athletic, and more likely to be criminal. As such, just being a Black man in America reinforces these expectations based on gender alone. This stereotyping begins as young as childhood, with Black boys being more likely than white boys to be sent home. Gender roles assumed by Black men in America. As a result, parents began educating their children on ways to negate negative stereotypes by performing a certain degree of deference, a humble submission and respect, something a young white man would never know. Black boys were told that even the most normal and mundane behaviors and activities, even as behaving in activities, will lead the Black boy to being stereotyped as threatening and aggressive. Um, to help negate such fears, Black men adopted different gender role-specific strategies. The Dapper Black Man strategy allows men to present themselves as non-threatening, intelligent members of society, unlikely to commit crime and unworthy of negative attention. And men who present with this strategy may dress very cleanly and in a respectable clothes associated with white-collar professions. This allows them to come off as unthreatening to those who observe them or society and disrupt the narratives that Black men are unintelligent and unkempt. This strategy can be a tool of empowerment for Black men who wish to disrupt the stereotypical status quo. Such an approach can encourage self-control and better sense of self-worth overall, but this is also a means to cultural survival for Black people, as statistics suggest that the only thing that can be threatening about a Black man in a encounter with the police is the color of their skin tone. While many Black men may fall victim, while many other Black men may fall victim to stereotypical tropes that plague their culture and may behave overly promiscuous and in a tough manner. The hypermasculinity strategy is a coping strategy that Black adolescent males may assume as a reactive strategy to negative experiences in their personal lives, local communities, and their schools. By presenting a tough guy front, Black men create a reputation for themselves that they fit into society's standards of the ideal man, and presenting themselves with limited vulnerability and with an exaggerated masculinity allows the hypermasculine Black man strategy to act as a defense for unwanted discrimination. Many Black men adopt this strategy as a combination of the dehumanization of Black men within the media and a limited representation of the illustrations of masculinity within the home. Media portrayals reinforce hypermasculine stereotypes of Black men, leading some Black men to internalize and perform these exaggerated masculine traits. This gender strategy can result in Black men being stereotyped as players or promiscuous men, and the adoption of the strategy can result in intimate relationships being difficult to navigate with complicated rules surrounding the expression of emotions and difficulty expressing them in intimate settings. The stereotyping of Black women in America also dates back to slavery. Enslaved Black women performed the same kinds of hard labor their male counterparts performed while also bearing the responsibility of regular house chores like cooking and cleaning and tending to the white children of the families that enslaved them. This forced matriarchal presence of Black women within the home was evident. Many white slave owners believed that the women that they had violently enslaved were unwaveringly loyal to them as slave owners. Their forced presence, providing childcare and providing advice, created a racial stereotype, the mammy, an exaggerated racial stereotype designed to make a mockery of the domestication of Black women, the forced domestication of Black women. Slavery in America also gave way to a much more harmful stereotype for Black women as well. Many white slave owners would forcibly sexually assault their slaves with the belief that since they were their property, they could do whatever they wished to them as a result. Fellow white men within the slave trade exploited their female slaves with sex, viewing Black women as more sexually exotic and promiscuous. This notion brought about the harmful racial stereotype of the Jezebel. This exaggerated racial stereotype was the result was an account created by white men for their sexual exploitation of Black women during the slave trade. Such a stereotype carried the cultural assumption that Black women had an insatiable sexual desire for the white man. This leads us to gender roles assumed by Black women in America. Being an African American woman in America is difficult. Black women today are subject to an array of different mixed signals that confuse their perception of the gender roles available to them. Because of this, society expects Black women to embody both masculine and feminine. This expectation is even upheld by primary groups present within one's life. As a mother explained, her daughter exhibits the duality of masculine and feminine traits that allows people to perceive her as both a woman and a warrior. African American today adopt an array of gender strategies that may allow them to cope with expectations imposed on them today. The strong Black woman strategy allows women to exhibit emotional resilience and a sense of independence. The foundations of the strong Black woman strategy are perseverance and caregiving. And this is a survival strategy with its origins in slavery because Black women were forced to suppress their visual signs of pain and emotional signs of pain, as well as shoulder the emotional burdens of their Black people, men, children, and elders. This was to prepare them for the persecution they were to face on plantations, and this strategy allows most African American women to embody a sense of empowerment and independence for themselves. African American women who subscribe to this strategy persist through difficult situations with limited resources and can cope independently and lend a helping hand without assuming you'll return the favor. The intellectual Black woman is a gender role that African American women assume to highlight their intellectual capabilities to society. Black women performing this strategy feel empowered to dismantle the complex of inferiority and hypersexualization that surrounds the status of being a Black woman. Many women who perform this strategy um, also pursue higher education as a form of personal satisfaction. They view it as the currency to form of the ultimate form of self-government and financial well-being. This allows Black women to reclaim their power by regaining the key to overall independence. The intellectual Black woman creates a status of reputability, and good character that society associates with African American women. And this can be observed through African American women's increasing presence within politics. This strategy also empowers Black women to regain sexual autonomy and helps dismantle the systems of both hypersexualization and dehumanization that oppress them from being viewed with equality and acceptance. Structural inequalities of race and gender include schooling. So the origins of educational inequality date back to a time in segregation that helped reinforce the false narratives that decreased intellectual ability is the result of race and race alone, and something that education couldn't help. After the desegregation of schools in the 70s, this theory was proved to be inaccurate over time. Between 1976 and 1994, the average scores of African Americans had increased by 54 points, effectively narrowing the gap between white and minority students' SAT scores. This statistic helps give ground to the idea that the limited access to education is simply a racial disadvantage impeding America's ability to reach true equality, not just the fault of race itself. The current reality of unequal access to education is that educational disadvantages faced by people of other racial minority groups continue to be an issue. The cause of present-day educational disadvantages can be traced back to geographical locations of schools. Schools in urban areas are educating large numbers of students of color, but yet lack the proper funding to fully meet the needs of each student, and without the proper funding to provide equal education to students within high-density urban areas, we will never actually reach the true definition of equitable access to education. This, along with several other systems in place, prevents people of low income and racial minorities in schools from having the access to high quality education that white students may have access to throughout the systematic privileges granted to them. This can be illustrated by the lack of diversity or range of curricula present within low income minority dense schools. Many of them do not offer preparatory college classes for math or science. All of this paired with lower quality materials, teaching, and resources plays into the systematic discrimination faced by people of color the rest of their life. Gender and economic status. History proves time and time again that sexism is the reason women are perceived to hold significantly less value in the workplace. The patriarchy cements this idea that men are more efficient workers and provide an account for the basis of sexism to persist in occupational organizations. This is why men are advantaged within the workplace, especially white privileged men. Men are indeed working more than women for compensation, and they earn better benefits too. They receive higher quality on the job training and are likely to receive more of it due to their perceived increased efficiency compared to women. And as a result, men dominate some of the highest levels of corporate society. They compose 65% of senior managers and directors, 70% of board members, and 92% of Fortune 500 CEOs. Gender and economic wage inequalities. Um, First, to understand the effects that gender has economically, we must cover some of the causes of gender inequality throughout occupational institutions. Um, and that begins with gender job segregation and its causes and relevance. Gender job segregation is the process of separating an occupation by gender. It is a systematic pattern in place enabling employers associative memory by assigning girl jobs and boy jobs. Gender job segregation is the product of three possible hypotheses. Socialization hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that our binary classes play a part in gender segregation. The binary classes enable men and women to apply gender salience to the relevance of gender across contexts and social institutions to specific occupations, and this may affect the way that they are captivated to join a certain profession based on the understanding that the occupation is only fit to one gender. The employer selection hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests employers impose a gender binary upon the applicants they choose for which positions using their gender to explain why they've been chosen. If such were true, once a profession was dominated by men or women, employers would continue to hire in a gender consistent pattern. The selective exit hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that women in male-dominated occupations are leaving at a substantially higher rate than their male counterparts within the same field of work. Some women and very low percentage of men who get degrees within stereotypical fields like engineering never enter their degree field or leave once they do. And most women cite hypermasculinity within the workplace as a reason for leaving. Gender job segregation holds relevance in the construction of economic gender inequalities within the society today through androcentrism. Androcentrism applies a higher overall value to masculine over feminine, which leads men to a world of advantages that women never are granted access to. Systematic barriers for women. Women encounter several systematic barriers within the workplace to prevent them from reaching their true potential within an occupation. Women face many barriers, most of which are invisible to the untrained eye that work to uphold the systematic disadvantages that they face each day, which lead to economic disparities. The use of benevolent sexism is one of the reasons that the cycle of disadvantages continues today. Employers hire women on the basis that they perform efficiently, but only tasks that a woman could do, scheduling, cleaning, and organizing. Benevolent sexism continually places women in positions of subordination to men, which is why the visibility of patriarchy within workplaces is so visible in present time. Paired with acts of hostile sexism, violently charged harassment meant to enforce a woman's subservience to men, this multi-layered type of discrimination helps lead us to the systematic barriers for women. The glass ceiling, the glass closet, the glass cliff, the glass escalator, and the sticky floor are all barriers that women encounter within the workplace that prevent them from reaching their true potential within an occupation. The gender wage gap. The financial gap between the earnings of a man and a woman compared to those of a woman who both work full-time. A full-time working woman only earns 83% of what a man earns. In other words, on a global scale, women only earn 17% of what men earn, but this is a slight improvement, one that comes from an increase in education among women. In the 80s, women went through significantly less schooling than their male counterparts, but in 2010, the tables have turned, with women outperforming men, increasing their years of educational experience. With increased access to education for women of all racial backgrounds, women are pursuing higher education at an advanced rate, and as a result, joining the workforce at an increasing rate as well. While the root causes of gender inequality are still technically unknown, these findings within this study are an example that women's growing accomplishments alongside their male counterparts within the workplace have proved the point that gender shouldn't be the defining factor of somebody's skill set. This is great evidence to refute that gender wage inequality is a reflection of women's core skill set. Managerial positions come with more upward mobility in the labor market, but wage inequality persists. Even though women are armed with degrees in fields of management, women have joined the ranks of male-dominated industries with lucrative capital, only adding 17% more women to these high-paying occupations. The decrease in the gender pay, the de yeah, the increase in the gender pay gap within these professions remains more prominent than ever, at 69%. A large portion of this gap can be related to the unequal returns to women despite their increasing levels of education, years of experience, making it extremely difficult to seek gender equality within the workplace. Along with the high rate at which women have been introduced into these occupations has made this gender inequality increasingly more evident. Despite all of this, though, there is a trend of the gender wage gap narrowing, but it will take 134 years to achieve complete gender pay equality. Other systematic barriers in place are the mommy track and the mommy tax. Today's U.S. labor market jobs are difficult to find, and even more so to do for a woman who happens to be a mom. The ideal worker norm is a cultural norm impressed upon those in a workforce from a young age. The underlying devotion of energy, time, and commitment to one's occupational position. And employers today may hire you under the impression that they are going to be your only priority for the rest of your life. This is why being a mother creates an undeniable obstacle for employers during the hiring process. Moms have kids, a home, a family. All of these elements already being established in her life creates the assumption that her job performance will reflect poorly as a result of being a mother. This leads us to the mommy track and the mommy tax. The mommy tax is a term that is used to highlight the lost wages and Social Security contributions and other benefits like workplace experience that come with taking time to start a family and raise a child. Childbirth is the first contribution to the mommy tax, and in the life leading up to the birth of the couple's first child, a mother and a father's earnings can be seen to be improving at similarly consistent rates to one another. But after a child is introduced to the equation, women can see a 6% decrease in earnings, and after 2 years, this decrease in earnings increases to 9%. The breadwinner housewife model contributes to the mommy tax because when couples start building families, they practice something called specialization, which is the unequal divide of paid and unpaid work. The prioritization of the development of one's career, usually the man's, over the other's career creates a deficit in experience in the workforce for women contributing to the mommy tax. Without dual incomes, the family becomes more dependent on the breadwinner, and as the family grows, they become more dependent on specialization and the breadwinner's career. It's a perpetuating cycle. Domestic outsourcing allows economically privileged couples to lessen their load by paying for childcare, but these domestic jobs are usually considered unfavorable jobs with awful hours, low wages, and no benefits, and 92% of domestic workers are women, with 52% of them being racial or ethnic minorities. Sorry about that. The mommy track is an idea that comes with the unwritten understanding that you should expect less from working mothers and that they are sacrificing the right to promotions, raises, and pay equality because they are a mother. Being put on the mommy track is an unfair consequence made in negative judgment and overgeneralization of all mothers as a whole to be less competent workers. Women who give birth face an unlikely chance of being promoted because they spend time away from work establishing a family, and on the off chance that they do become elevated within their occupational ranks, they'll make about 27% less than their childless coworkers. Women, women are perceived to hold more promotional value pre-pregnancy than after pregnancy. This is probably due in part to them meeting the ideal worker norm standards. After women give birth, they're likely to advance only 4.6 more ranks compared to before. They were likely to advance at least 6 times. This all results in the motherhood penalty, which is a overall decrease in wages observed over time in a woman's career once she establishes her motherhood. This unfair standard is also reflected amongst the highest earning women. Next, moving on to gender and sexuality. This is a short but brief section, but I wanted to make sure I covered it because it's important. So, gender identity refers to how individuals perceive themselves and what they call themselves, which may align with or differ from the sex assigned at birth. Um, Examples include man, woman, non-binary, genderqueer, transgender. Sexual orientation describes an enduring pattern of attraction. So, um, like, sorry, um, you know, who you sleep with, whether or not you're consistently attracted to men or consistently attracted to women, or maybe you don't even see gender at all and you don't care. Unique challenges presented with um the intersectionality of these identities. Um, Bisexual identities often encounter stereotypes, invalidation, and a lack of visibility in both heterosexual and LGBTQ spaces, and this leads to less research and fewer resources focused on bisexual issues. Bisexual individuals often encounter stereotypes, such as the assumption that their sexuality is invalid because they simply can't choose. The idea that somebody could consistently flip back and forth between liking one or the other perpetuates this idea that bisexual people are indecisive and that they're cheaters and that's why they're bisexual. Um, and uh, Transgender and non-binary individuals are often excluded from discussions and policies, and this can be seen with how we excluded transgender and non-binary individuals and their thoughts and their feelings and their discussions on the policy of bathrooms. We never considered them. We just kind of stomped all over, unfortunately. Um, Discrimination within and outside the LGBTQ community. Transgender individuals face disproportionately high rates of workplace discrimination, denial of healthcare, and physical violence, which significantly increases their likelihood for mental illnesses and physical um and phys or sorry significantly affect their mental and physical health. Internal discrimination within the LGBTQ spaces create biases like biphobia and transphobia that create further divisions within a community that is already pretty divided into categories. This results in excluding and alienating certain members, especially those who defy traditional narratives of sexuality or gender or both. Moving on to gender and disability, double marginalization is the intersection of two marginalized social identities and the resulting layered discrimination faced by those belonging to multiple groups of marginalized people. Stereotypes of uh, disabled women um, women who have cognitive disabilities are perceived as naive and innocent and therefore in need of protection and care. Women who have physical disabilities may feel overlooked at the hands of their disability, and many women with physical disabilities may be viewed as incapable of as experiencing sexual feelings or attracting partners. The infantilization of disabled women. Disabled women face a dual stigmatization that leads to their infantilization. The patriarchy imposes a sense of subordination upon disabled women, while the discrimination that comes with being disabled is very similar. Disabled women need to be cared for and protected, not because the patriarchy said so, but because that's how they are perceived, um, which is incapable of caring for themselves. The overall assumption that disabled women lack the perception of bodily autonomy. This perpetuates the overall assumption that disabled women lack perception of bodily autonomy. The asexual disabled woman is a harmful stereotype imposed upon disabled women that creates the false narrative that they are unable to feel romantic or sexual feelings or desires. This is so harmful as it leads to great erasure of the disabled person's sexuality. This creates great implications when sexual minorities are disabled, as they risk limited access to physical and mental health resources that can help them cope with their disabilities, sexualities, and mental health. The genderless disabled woman. Disabled women lack the proper feminized representation in the media that they deserve, and as a result, are distanced from even more feminine standards we uphold able-bodied women. Disabled women may have decreased self-esteem due to this inhumane marginalization of disabled women to be unattractive or feel so spiritually lost within their disability that they cannot define gender through feminine expression at all. Stereotypes within disabled men. Cognitively disabled men can often be seen as someone who is unintentionally hypersexual, labeled with insatiable sexual drives that they are unable to contain. Men with physical disabilities are self-conscious as they compare themselves to other able-bodied counterparts. Disabled men and women both face harsh misconceptions that they are incapable of having a partner due to their physical disability. The hypersexualization of disabled men. In a study performed within the workplace about overgeneralization of disabled men and women, 9 participants were asked a question that encompassed how they felt about disabled men and sexually disabled men, and if they are sexually driven in forms of relationship based on sexual desire. The results yielded that staff believed men with intellectual disabilities were more likely to be viewed as sexually driven, in some cases unintentionally predatory. This creates a false narrative that lumps disabled men within the harmful and restrictive traditional gender stereotype that classifies men as sexually charged beings with the inability to develop emotionally intimate relationships. The masculinization of disabled men. People with physical disabilities often aren't perceived. Sorry, let me restart. Physical disabilities obstruct society's perception of men with disabilities by placing them in a genderless category of their own. This can be harmful in the development of the healthy sexual autonomy of a young disabled man and impact their overall sexual expression and gender identity. Asexual disabled man. Men with physical disabilities and mental disabilities are perceived as less sexually active, with their respective disability being the catalyst for their unintentional asexuality. This, however, is a myth. Disabled people, including men, view themselves as being more sexually active and able-bodied folk and desirous of having romantically fulfilling relationships that end up building a social life career and having a family. Strategies that counteract disability stereotypes. Disabled men reconstruct their masculinity. Disabled men often challenge conventional masculine norms by embracing alternative masculinities that value emotional openness and interdependence. This redefinition allows them to maintain a positive self-conception and resist stigmatization of stereotypes. Disabled women embrace femininity. Women with physical disabilities perceive and express their sexuality by embracing their sexual identities and advocating for their rights. These women actively resist stereotypes that depict them as asexual or passive, thereby promoting a more inclusive understanding of femininity. The consequences of ignoring intersectionality. Background. The U.S. has one of the highest maternal mortality rates among developed nations, and Black women are disproportionately affected. Black women in the United States face an increased risk of maternal mortality compared to any other ethnicity in the United States. The maternal morbidity rate for Black women is 53.3% of every 100,000 Black babies born. While maternal mortality rates in Black women could be attributed to complications during birth or pre-existing illnesses, pregnant Black women are at a disadvantage simply because of their intersecting identities. Black women are nearly 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes compared to white women. Many studies have shown that Black women's recent gender place them within systematically disadvantaged communities with fewer resources for health insurance, health clinics, and social mobility. all of which contribute to the cycle of discrimination and racism that is prevalent within the many systems built to help them, like the healthcare system. When we can comprehend how intersectional identities collude with one another to create layered effects of marginalization and systematic discrimination, we can one day dismantle the systems in place that put them there. Intersectionality ignored. The weathering framework. This framework allows us to attribute the morbidity of rate of Black children and their mothers to the structural impacts of racism. The stress caused by the exposure to racist attitudes and aggression creates a vulnerability within the overall health of a Black woman. This is something that can be seen in the increased number of young Black females who wait past their late teens to have a child, something that their white peers do not do. Consequently, this is something that is done out of fear that young Black women may have for their child. She may not want her child to endure the same racism that she has endured in her life. The root framework allows us to conceptualize how parts of a Black woman's social identity intersect with society's perception of a Black woman and how this perception can impact the kind of healthcare she receives in her future. Social determinants include things such as housing, education, income, and geographical location that limit access to care. Structural determinants include things like the GI Bill, slavery, and structural racism. Both social and structural determinants overlap to create implicit biases towards Black women that affect the quality of care they receive and whether they have access to that care. Racism in healthcare leads to implicit biases. The social construction of racism persists within the medical community and creates structural racism that impacts Black girls and women as they seek medical intervention, which is why structural racism is one of the many ways disease persists in both the US and other countries. These subconscious prejudices create an unlikelihood that a patient will receive the close care that is tailored to them and their personal needs. Structural racism is a byproduct of the harmful stereotypes, prejudices, and microaggressions faced by Black people within a society. When social support of Black Americans is prevalent within a society, structural racism faces the challenges of persevering through change. And as a result, the morbidity and mortality rate of Black women goes down. This shows the intersectional influence that politics and media have on the perception of race and gender. Economic status. Black women are more likely to face financial barriers that prevent them from accessing high quality healthcare. The socioeconomic inequalities created by the intersectionality of being Black and being a woman contribute to the lack of high quality resources for prenatal and postpartum care, something that can be demonstrated through the level of insurance coverage available to an individual. The Medicaid coverage gap is a structurally racist policy, something that occurs when one is below the poverty line and lives in a state with unexpanded Medicaid. Medicaid covers 40% of U.S. births and 65% of births to Black mothers. Almost 30% of Black women that are able to give birth are in the Medicare coverage gap, which limits their access to quality preconception and prenatal services and prospects of safer pregnancy and birth for a parent and baby. Socioeconomic status and mental health conditions account for 36 to 42% of racial inequalities in postpartum stress loads. The consequences of ignoring intersectionality. Health outcomes. Implicit biases can be created as a result of patient guilt, caregiver interactions. This is why the stress of having cultural competency is so important. These implicit biases based upon skin color can lead to an under consideration of a Black woman's pain or just completely erase the validity of her symptoms overall. 30% of Black and Hispanic women in the US who delivered in a hospital reported the provider mistreated or compared them compared to 21% of white women. In other words, women of color are 10 times more likely to face racial discrimination that leads to an obstruction in the quality of services rendered to the patient. Erosion of trust. The implicit biases at work within the medical system can cause healthcare providers to overlook Black women and their concerns by reducing them to an unfair, offensive stereotype that obstructs the healthcare provider's view of the patient and their symptoms. This has long-term effects on the trust that Black women have with their healthcare provider, and it can be seen when Black women encounter a sense of fear or hesitancy when trying to seek medical attention. Policy features. Policies illustrated to improve maternal health often take a universal approach, failing to address how racism and economic inequality intersect with their gender to disproportionately affect Black women. Similarly to feminism, these policies only take into account the difficulties of the majority without considering the need to be aware of the unique experiences that impact young Black women's mental health. The lack of culturally competent care present within medical facilities is adding to the alarming rate of systemic racism that can result in subpar care for young Black women and their children. And with that, um, I have two questions for further review. How do intersectional identities like gender, race, and sexuality face compound with the challenges individuals face within marginalized communities? Can you think of specific examples from this presentation? What role does erasure, bisexual, of transgender, or non-binary experiences play in perpetuating systemic inequalities, and how can these issues be addressed? And to encourage empathy, I want you to imagine navigating a world where multiple aspects of your identity are misunderstood or discriminated against. How might this affect your ability to express yourself or access opportunities? And I also want you to think about a time you might have felt excluded or misrepresented, and how might these feelings resonate with the experiences of those facing intersectional oppression? What can you do to foster greater understanding and inclusion? I'm going to answer the second one. I don't see race within myself. And let me explain that. My ethnicities, my racial contents, whatever you want to call it. I'm Eastern Indian, I'm Italian, and I'm Greek. That's all I know. I never met my dad. That's the sad reality of it. So I don't really hold any cultural importance or any value. My race has no value to my identity. Um, But I will say, the more I saw people on TV that I knew were also Eastern Indian or API or whatever you'd like to call it, um, it made me feel more included as a brown woman, if we're gonna overgeneralize, I guess. It made me feel more included. And I think if we can better understand how people have been oppressed and how it's made them feel their whole lives, then we can actually work our way towards um, more inclusion and understanding. And I think that's why the erasure of things like DEI is such a big thing. And with this current administration, I just encourage you to look at everything through an empathetic and a sympathetic lens. And thank you for listening to this. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.